From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Experts at History Colorado have been thinking of different ways to help commemorate Colorado's 150th birthday next year. And one idea was to track down the earliest known photograph of Colorado. What they uncovered is striking. It's a daguerreotype from 1853 taken during an expedition across the West a couple of decades before Colorado became a state in 1876. The image depicts a Cheyenne village with two people facing the camera near what is now Lamar, Colorado. And there's a link to see the image in our show notes and at KUNC.org. For the curators at History Colorado, the photo also revealed the fascinating story of the photographer, Solomon Nunez Carvalho, who traveled the West with a bulky camera and captured some of the earliest photos of the region. To learn more about the search for the photo, I spoke to Sam Bock, History Colorado's Director of Interpretations and Publications.
This is a photograph of a Cheyenne village or a Cheyenne camp at Big Timbers, which, as you said, is near present-day Lamar. It was a really important place, a gathering place during the summer for Cheyenne people and a place of trade and refuge for them. The photograph itself depicts some teepees and some families, along with what appears to be either food or other kinds of hides that were hanging to dry on a rack that the villagers had constructed there.
And Sam, you led the hunt for the photo, which was found in the Library of Congress. I'm curious, what made you want to track down the oldest photo of Colorado?
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of a funny story. We have an excellent research volunteer. His name is Jim England, and he just is dogged. And one day we were enjoying some pastrami sandwiches and talking about what the state was going to do to commemorate its 150th anniversary, and just kind of started wondering what was the oldest photo in Colorado, or the oldest photo of Colorado. So it turned out to be surprisingly easy to track this down. Jim started looking at a bunch of records in the Library of Congress and across different federal records. Okay. And as it turned out, this was a pretty obvious candidate. This was the earliest days of photography in the United States. This early daguerreotype method was pretty rare. The number of people in the country who knew how to do that was very slim. And so without too much work, it turned out that we dug this right up. And, we're not saying that this is definitely the oldest photo, but to us, this is the most promising candidate.
Okay. I like that caveat. And Sam, how did it feel to realize you had found perhaps the oldest known image of Colorado? What was that like?
Well, as a historian, it's just so interesting to see all these little peeks into the past. And as a Western American historian in particular, so much of the time that we think of as kind of the heyday of the Old West, it happened right alongside all of these big transformational technological changes, like the introduction of the railroad and like the introduction of photography. And so to me, it just made me think about the times and how vastly different everything was in 1853 than, how it was even 5 years earlier when the area that they were in was actually part of Mexico.
I want to switch gears and talk about the photographer. This image was captured by a man named Solomon Nunez Carvalho. He was part of a privately funded expedition through this uncharted territory of the West. Sam, what do we know about this expedition and what they were looking for?
Yeah, this expedition was one of John C. Fremont's many attempts to kind of cross the West and create maps and really make a name for himself as an explorer in the American West. And on previous expeditions, he had attempted to make daguerreotype photographs. Mm-hmm. This was really a new technology, but it is absolutely a delicate technology. This is, the earliest days of photography. So it's a really far cry from pulling out your iPhone and just taking a couple of digital snaps. You have to develop this in place. And a lot of the time it involves a glass plate negative and incredible amounts of really caustic chemicals. So the photographs from the earlier expeditions didn't survive long enough to make it back to be seen. And then this one was, along with every other photograph that Carvalho took on that expedition, was touched by this fire. And as far as we can tell, this is the only one that survived, at least survived enough to even depict anything.
And so I think you mentioned that John C. Fremont went out looking for, kind of scouting out a route for a railroad?
Yeah, that's correct. Even in 1853, U.S. government and private industry was already looking for a way to cross the continent on rails. And so this is kind of scouting out a location, scouting out a route for the Transcontinental Railroad through the West.
You were able to uncover quite a bit about the life of Carvalho. Sam, what was his life like prior to going out on this expedition?
Yeah, Carvalho's, I think, is just a really unique and interesting story of the United States. It's an immigrant story. It's a story of, people from all over the globe coming into contact in the West and, kind of creating a new world. Carvalho was the son of Jewish Portuguese immigrants. He was born in the United States, and his parents were Jewish refugees fleeing persecution in Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
And Carvalho's father was involved with establishing Jewish immigrant support services in cities up and down the East Coast, like Philadelphia and even Baltimore.
So it sounds like he had a very busy life already. How did he even end up on this expedition going out to the West?
Well, Carvalho was one of the very few people who would be considered an expert in daguerreotypes at the time. He and his father, they were interested in art, they were interested in technology, and by all accounts, this seems to have been kind of a hobby that turned into a profession. In Philadelphia, the two had started a business taking photographs, still portraiture photographs for people in Philadelphia. Again, this is a new technology, and it would have been something really fun to take your family and have your first photograph made. So as Fremont was looking for a photographer who was going to be able to bring back these images successfully, he started looking all over the country and was put in contact with Carvalho, and that's how he got involved with the expedition.
Sam, I want to ask you to zoom out a bit. What does this image tell us about Colorado in 1853?
Well, this image is really of a moment in transition. It shows us the indigenous peoples of the land living in the ways that had been handed down to them, that they had developed over time in Colorado, that were matched to this landscape and to the resources available to them. But it also shows the massive upheaval that these people were about to encounter as the U.S. military, as the United States government starts becoming a bigger and bigger part of everyday life for everybody in southeastern Colorado. So, the big picture, I think, here is, it's not only one of upheaval and change, but I think it's just a classically American story. It's an immigrant story. It's the story of territorial movement. It's the story of people looking for better lives. It's the story of economic development with the coming of the Transcontinental Railroad, and of technological development with the emergence of these daguerreotype photos. So, I think as a historian, it's impossible for me to not be interested in this, because it just represents so many different currents and forces and rendezvous of history coming together in one place at this time.
That's Sam Bock, History Colorado's Director of Interpretations and Publications, talking about what he thinks is the oldest photo ever taken in Colorado. We'll have links where you can learn more and see the image for yourself in the show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.